Okay, so September is over and it's time for the video critique of our 5th monthly theme. And as always, this is the system I'm going to use to go through the images. First consideration is, does it fit the theme? This month's theme was reflections, and I can tell you right now all of the images submitted do meet the theme requirements. So that's taken care of. Second consideration is artistic and aesthetic considerations, and those are going to be things such as composition and how I feel about an image. Also, what was required to take the image as far as artistry. And then the third considerations is technical considerations. Those are going to be things like camera settings, use of a tripod, etc. The grading system is A, I wish I had taken that picture. B, I would be happy with that picture. A C is I wouldn't keep the picture unless there was a particular reason for it. And D is it meets the requirements but has major flaws, technical flaws, not things I would consider opinion. And then F is, did you read the assignment? And we will not have any Fs. First image we have is by Carol. We have settings of 1/15 of a second at f8, ISO 200 and a 23mm lens. And ISO's low, and I believe that's as low as that camera goes, so that's good. Shutter speed is slow, but the image looks sharp to me, so I would expect that a tripod was used. So that's a good job. And I don't see any issue with the settings offhand, and looking at the image larger, I don't see any particular issue with the settings either. A little bit of green in the background, that's probably the paper and lack of focus back there. Okay, first thing I'm looking at here is the white balance doesn't look quite right to me. It looks a little blue-greenish, and that would be the first aesthetic consideration I see. But we fixed that pretty quickly with the dropper tool, and there we have a more correct white balance. Still a little yellow on the paper, but that's probably actual color back there. Still looks a little underexposed. We can fix that. Other aesthetic considerations. I like the angle that is on the plants here, going like this. I like the angle there, but I'm not real fond of the angle back here. And so I think I would have put the music more level. Now that would create more separation between the flowers and the sheet music, at least in this section here, but with a low enough angle, most of that would be hidden. Alright, a few other things I'm seeing aesthetically. The water drops. I'm not entirely taken with the water drops. They're creating some issues here due to this water on the mirror, reflective surface, kicking the light back up. We have it there, we have it down here in the reflection, where this drop right here is reflecting light back up underneath, causing this shadow reflection, and I find those somewhat distracting. And I don't know that the subject, the dying roses, really goes with the fresh spring morning rain kind of idea that the droplets convey. So I'm not entirely taken with the water drops as such, but I understand the motivation for doing it. I just don't think it worked as well as it could. Another consideration here is the use of a mirror. Because the reflective surface of a mirror is underneath the glass, but the glass also reflects, we end up with these multiple reflections. We have a ghost reflection there, and then our primary reflection in this area. And that is a little bit of a negative to the image as such. You can see in this area over here, around in this area, where we've got, it just makes the image busy due to the double reflections. So your best choice for a reflective surface is going to be a polished solid surface like marble or plexiglass or stainless steel. So the very top surface is the reflective surface, and you won't get those double reflections. Alright, the sheet music, I don't know what the song is, so I don't really know what it contributes to the image. So I'm not entirely certain on the inclusion of the music. I think it works well down here in the reflection area. It's a little distracting up here in the background area. Alright, image-wise, processing-wise, I don't really have any issues with it. You could try to do some cloning to remove these areas here. Just paint that out. See what it picks. Let's take a closer look at this while we're doing this. Good enough. You can try to get rid of this area here as well. Now if you use the healing tool, like I've got selected here, I'm on heal, it's going to tend to smudge things out a bit. We can try to put this where we want it. You can see that it's kind of smudging it, so we'll switch that over to the clone tool where it won't do that as badly. And at a smaller size, whoops, didn't do that. At a smaller size, that would not really be visible. So overall, I give this image a C, maybe a C plus. You know, my biggest issue with it, I think, is the water drops causing those reflections in places and the double reflection. I think clean those up and you'd have a B image. So nice job, just needs a little extra work, another attempt, and I think you could get there with this image. Alright, our next image is by Adrian. And we have 1/400 at f2.8, ISO 100 with a 55mm lens. And I really don't have an issue with any of those settings as such. We've got a bit of noise in this image, and that actually looks like, to a large extent, the characteristic of that noise tells me it was done or somewhat caused by processing. Probably noise reduction with a high level of detail retention. We could get rid of a lot of that, and I don't think it would affect this image significantly. Let's try to take down the detail. Alright, we get rid of most of that, and at least at the smaller size, I don't think it has adversely affected the image. So if we go to what it looked like before to what it looks like now, and there's really not a significant difference in the image, at least at this size. This image shows something that is pretty unique to photographing reflections, and that is that for the reflection to be in focus, the focus distance is from the camera sensor to the reflection and then from the reflection to the object being reflected. So because the distance to this tree is so much greater than the distance to this is a cell phone, there's no way to get both of those in focus at the same time, both the reflection and the phone, and certainly not at f2.8. As far as the f2.8 and the amount of out of focus, this blurring section here along a line here, along the edge of the screen, to me, that's somewhat problematic. I'm not as fond of that. And we have I'm assuming these are fingertips over here, creating large highlighted blobs. And for me, that level of contrast and lack of context, I guess, I don't know that that's a fingertip. So for me, that is slightly problematic here. And then aesthetically, I'm not entirely certain why we have a picture of tree on a cell phone. It's not a particularly great subject. It is a reflection, but it's not a particularly great subject. So I think I would stop down some to reduce the amount of blur here. I wouldn't necessarily want them both in focus. Like I said, you can't do that. I find the color of the screen nice, but the blur and the clashing colors, the red and blue, the warm and cold, it's a little distracting on this image. And so as far as this image goes, I think I would probably convert this one to black and white. Just switch that over to black and white, and I think it works better. And if we wanted to, we could kick up the contrast or lower the blacks to make our shadow a little more distinct. So overall, I think that works a little better in a black and white conversion. And I guess I would put this as a C image as it is. I would want at least a better reflection, something that I want to look at, I guess. You know, a bright, the tree with clouds and bright sky, something like that, something that conveys a little bit more of a message, a little more of a feeling, would bring this image up a level for me. All right, next image is my image, and it's a sandpiper in water. And if we look at this image, it's not really in focus. I've got 13200 at f5.6, ISO 640, 800 millimeter. This was handheld, right? And when I'm using really long lenses, it's like doing macro. A large amount of magnification requires higher than typical shutter speeds, and I like to be at 2 times, 3 times focal length. And I have my camera set to do that 3 times focal length automatically. But 1/3200th is 4 times. So I must have had the ISO fixed, which is pretty unusual for me. But the ISO must have been fixed, causing it to be 1/3200th. I could have used a lower ISO, which would have resulted in less noise in the background. And this already has a significant amount of noise reduction applied. It has color noise reduction applied to it already, and I still have some noise, right? None of that's actually contributing to this lack of sharpness. And I submitted this image on the forum as a fix my shot, see if anybody could tell me what I could have done better. And I didn't get any responses, so I'll give you the answer. It's the aperture. A 400 millimeter with a 2x TC, a 400-2.8 with a 2x TC becomes an 800 millimeter f5.6 lens, which means it's wide open with a teleconverter on it, and it's not entirely sharp wide open. Almost no lens ever is. Now the other consideration, so obviously I should have stopped down, but the other consideration in regards to that is diffraction. This being the D810, it goes into diffraction above f8. So this is an interesting situation where I get best results with this lens at f8 or 9, right around there. There's no improvement at f11 on the D810 due to diffraction. But if I use the same combination on my D4, a lower megapixel camera with larger pixels, it is sharper slightly at f11 than it is at f8. So by using a high resolution sensor, I've limited my options here. I'm pretty much stuck with f8 being my best choice. Wide open one stop is soft, and stop down one stop further to f11 doesn't gain me anything. So you'll find that most of my images taken with 800mm to 400-8 with the TC are going to be at f8. That's just where I set it and forget it. Alright, other considerations, you could consider this a bit distracting in the background here. It might not be entirely level. This water trail created by the bird itself looks level, this looks vertical, so this bit, you just kind of have to average it out. I thought this was pretty well. I could have focused more on the reflection by cropping this in tighter, but I didn't find that it really improved the image that much. And I've been trying to get away from the really tight crops, compositions, more of a scientific study, and going for a little more atmospheric images of wildlife, including scenery, environment, a little more. So I was happy with the way it was. Overall, I give this image a C. It's actually bordering on a D, and it really depends on the size I was going to use this image at. If I display it 8 by 10 or so, maybe a little smaller, then it would work okay with the level of sharpness this image has. Alright, our next image is by Karen, and I really like this image. A couple things. First, let's check the settings. We've got 1/500 at f8, ISO 155mm. Alright, plenty of shutter speed. f8's a reasonable aperture. I don't think there is a need for f8 because this is a very one-dimensional image. There's not a lot of depth to it where we need a depth of field. But already at base ISO with plenty of shutter speed, so there's no harm in stopping down on this. And well, actually, there's a benefit to it. I thought that was a prime lens, but it's not. It's a zoom, and at 55, f5.6 is wide open, so stop down one stop or so for sharpness away from wide open is an excellent choice. So I think that settings are just about ideal. Good job there. Alright, looking at the image aesthetically, this upper corner over here I find a little bit distracting, but it's far enough out that it doesn't really hurt the image. This bright area and dark spot here being so contrasting with the rest of the image draws a little bit more attention, but it also kind of makes this look like water. This is a statue, it's a chrome statue, reflection on a chrome statue, so this gives a sense of the contours that the reflection is on. I don't find that this building and pole down here really add to the image that much, and if we look at the image up close, it seems grainy. That's actually this, I'm guessing based on the settings, the surface of the chrome is not actually entirely smooth. So you could remove that if you wanted to, or you could leave it. Either way, I would probably remove it. Take most of that out, because there's really nothing here that is like, incredibly sharp. It's all distorted and somewhat abstract. Taking out the noise doesn't hurt the image at all. So I would probably do it like that. Alright, I created a virtual copy here. I'm going to do some additional edits on this. I'm going to crop it for what I think composition wise. I'm going to take out that left side, focus on that building. I'm going to take the highlight out at the top right side, and I'm going to put the composition right about there. Okay. Developmentally here, processing. I would probably process this pretty heavy. I'd take the highlights down, maybe not all the way, shadows up, way up towards the top, maybe adjust the blacks down, give it a little more contrast. And this image, I would take the vibrance up. What that does is take the lower levels, brings them up to match the higher levels. It is affecting all the colors. And then what I would do is bring the saturation and bring them all back down together to a happy point. Alright, maybe bump the contrast a little bit. Alright, we're not clipping anywhere on the highlights, we're clipping in the shadows. When you have black, it's just always going to look that way, at least in this histogram. We could turn on soft proofing, see what it looks like for a monitor, and when we select the monitor, there's much less clipping in the blacks. You can see some clipping here in the blues, and that's a saturation. Some of the reds along here, unless that's blacks as well. But that, as far as an sRGB profile, monitor profile, with a perceptual intent, it comes much closer. And if we were printing, we would want to use a paper, because that's going to be different as well, with much more saturation clipping. I normally leave this on sRGB, and if I use soft proofing at all. Alright, there's this area here, which is some dirt or something on a statue. A little distracting. That could be removed with some cloning. I think that could be removed with cloning relatively easily, but it might take multiple passes. See what it does for us. Ooh, let's go with heal. Nope. Cloning is better, but I don't like what it chose. So I'll choose something else. Maybe in there. Maybe make this a little larger and increase the feathering. We can do this one as well. But you get the idea. It would take a bit of finagling to get rid of all of it and make it look good, and might even require a trip out to Photoshop to clone all of that out. But I think it was probably worth the effort. Alright, so we went from this image with the highlight distraction, the additional on the left side, and a format, a ratio that would be pretty hard to print and frame to this image, which is a little closer to a standard aspect ratio. Let's see what it would be. So it's a little wider. A little wider. But we went from here to here. And I think that works just a bit better. I give this image a B to B+. It's on the abstract side, but I like it. Nice job. Here we have an image by MJ, 1/800th of a second at f5.6, ISO 200, 300 millimeter, 70 to 300 millimeter zoom lens, which is f5.6 at 300 millimeters. So right off the bat, we can say that 300 millimeter 5.6 is wide open and it's not going to be its sharpest there. At this size, I don't see a problem with that. But if we look real close at the sharpest areas of the image, it's not entirely tack sharp. So stopping down would have been a benefit there. We have 1/800 of a second, so if we stop down to f8 for sharpness, we would be down at 1/400th, which is pushing things with a 300 millimeter. With a VR, that might be very acceptable. With good technique, it would be acceptable. Or we could push the ISO up to 400 to put the shutter speed back at 800 and be safe on the shutter speed. And I don't know that the noise would be significantly worse at 400. I kind of doubt it would be. So I think that's probably what should have been done here. F8, ISO 400 for 1/800 second shutter speed. Aesthetically, this image is just too busy for me. There's too much. You know, we have something of a point of focus here, but it's lost in the background. So for me, this image is a C, and I don't think there's anything you could really do to help this. Got some highlights that are a bit bright, distracting here. We could try to tone those down, and they're throughout the image. And I'll show you a trick here. We'll use an adjustment brush, and we'll take I'll make it really drastic just to show. But I'm going to take and I'm going to ensure that the auto masking down here, this checkbox right there, is selected. All right, and then I'm going to make my brush as large as possible. Or size, let's max this thing out. Bigger, 100%. All right, and with auto masking, whatever the center point is on, so I'm on that highlight, when I select it, anything underneath the brush that has that same color and tonality will be selected. And let me go ahead and make this more drastic. We'll kick the flow up so that it becomes more significant. And you can see now that all these areas that are shaded, right here, over here, down in here, all of those areas that were highlights were automatically selected with one brush. It makes it a lot easier to make a lot of fine adjustments, because if I were to do this individually, get rid of that tool. If I were to come down here and do this individually. With a smaller brush. Every time I cross something, like I did there, that would be selected. Every time I come in here, that stuff would be selected. It becomes much more difficult to select those smaller areas of highlights. So that's a quick tip. All right, so for me, this image is a C, and well, I'll just leave it at that. Our next image is by Joaquin, and it's taken 1/125th at f10, ISO 100, on 44 millimeters from a 2470 f2.8. So stop down quite a ways, low ISO, plenty of shutter speed. So I don't really see an issue with any of these camera settings. Take a look in here, and there's a bit of noise, which would be expected with fog. Fog does that. And I really like this image. To me, this image is an atmospheric image. It's not really about the finer details. So for this image, I would get rid of that fog noise. You can just do that with some luminance smoothing. Just bang that up, get rid of the fog noise. And one thing cameras tend to do is they tend to cut through fog. It comes out as noise instead of the soft focus that we notice in person. And we could increase the sense of fog by reducing the clarity along ways. Actually, let me go here. I'm going to invert that, create a copy, and do those same things. Get rid of a bunch of the noise and reduce the clarity. And you notice when I reduce the clarity, it affects the trees up here mostly. That's without it. These edges here and through here, and then with a reduction in clarity. So it puts more of that hazy feel that you would have had in person, and adds to that fog atmosphere. Now the color of this image is pretty saturated, and it looks to me like a color overlay. I don't mind it at all. I've seen images that are almost this saturated in real life, almost this orange, but this is a little more uniform than I would expect. But I don't care. I like it. So not a ding there. It's a little bit much to be completely believable if you're being really particular. All right, some other things I might do with this image. I'd probably pull some of the highlights down a little bit, bring up the shadows a bit to bring out these trees in this area and over here. Bring those out a bit, and then maybe increase the contrast. So what I'm trying to get is some highlights so they stand out a little bit more, and maybe pull the blacks down a little bit. That's a bit much. Now, this would work a lot better on a raw file because I'm noticing some gamma banding occurring because I'm working with a JPEG. So the results would be a lot better if this was working off of a raw file. I think what I would do with this image is then further go in here and take an adjustment brush. We'll add some exposure, increase the clarity back up, and pull these shadow highlights down. And we're going to brush in some highlights, some of these areas. Give the image a few areas of more, I don't know, contrast or attention. So take these areas that are kind of highlighted already. We'll bring those up a little bit. We'll take another brush and we'll do the opposite. We'll take some areas, we'll bring them back down. So we're just going to create a little more contrast in certain areas of this image. Maybe take this area down. Maybe something like that. And like I said, it would work better if we had a raw file. So I'm going to bring up this central area here, because that line, we've got the highlights through here, and it leads right through and then up through this area. So that helps bring you in through the image without having any hard delineation. So just by highlighting that little area, it helps pull through a little further. And I think that's about where I would be at with this. Maybe push these highlights a little harder. But I really actually pretty minor changes. If we go back to the original, it was like this, a little bit on the flat side, and then brought it up to this with a little more of a foggy feel to it and a few areas of greater contrast to make the image overall a little more interesting. But all in all, I think it's an excellent image, and I would give this an A. Be very happy with this image. I particularly like the little ripple a fish put in there for you. Particularly like that. Nice job. All right, we have another image by MJ, and camera settings 1/500 at f8, ISO 200 on a 35mm lens. That's all I've got. f8 stop down, 1/500 is plenty of shutter speed, ISO 200 is as low as that camera goes, so I have no issues with the camera settings. Compositionally, I agree with cropping tighter than the other image you originally posted. I do think it needed cropped down from there. However, I think we may have gone a little bit too far with the cropping. One of the cardinal rules is to not crop at joints. So we've got it cropped right off through the hand here, right at the wrist, right at the knee, and I think this might have benefited from a little looser composition as far as that goes. So I agree with cropping tighter, but perhaps not quite this tight or quite where you did. All right. I like the story it conveys. I like the reflection. The focus is here. The reflection's secondary. And you'll probably tone this down, flip the emphasis a little bit. You'll probably just put a gradient on this. See if we can bring down that area. How far we go with this? Just throw a gradient on there, tone. Just by bringing the brightness down here, it brings up the emphasis on the reflection. I don't know that I like it better or worse that way. A little better, but maybe not that much of a reduction of exposure. The legs looked a little funny to me. But overall, I give this image a B. Yeah, I give it an image a B. All right. I think the composition could probably use a little bit of work. Is this an original aspect? It's not quite a typical aspect. And the only reason I mention that is if you go away from these standard aspects, then you're going to have a harder time actually framing it. And, so if you actually wanted to print and frame this, it looks like it's holding it a 5.7. So that's good. Good choice. So those abnormal aspects that become problematic. All right. B image for me. All right, here we have an image by Ian, and we have forks being reflected on, I'm guessing that's some kind of silver serving ware or of that stainless or something like that, because it has contours to it. And to me, that's adversely affecting the reflections. It's warping them a bit. And I find it a little busy in here where everything's overlapping, all the reflection and the silverware and the reflection. So we've got 1, 2, I don't know. It's a little too busy for me in this composition. I would like it a little looser, a little less busy. Camera settings 1/50th, f8, ISO 250, 35mm, enough shutter speed, sharp enough aperture, ISO 250 is low enough, shouldn't be problematic. And it does look kind of grainy, and a lot of that I think is due to a lack of sharpness. The only sharp area here really is the top edge, and I would like something else more in focus, more down towards the center of the image. And that's partially due to focusing on the reflection. The distance to the tines here, the actual tines, is less than the distance to the reflection, to the object creating the reflection. So it's hard to get them all in focus. They're close enough together that I think if you stop down further, you could get there to have more in focus here, the subject, while retaining the reflection. To do that, you'd be pushing your shutter speed, which then means a tripod, but it would probably be worth doing. So for me, this image is a C, C+, somewhere in that area. My biggest is it's too busy, it lacks a point of focus for me. Second image by Ian, same settings, same comment. I think stopping down using a tripod might have helped bring the actual tines more into focus, because the amount of out of focus on the tines is a bit distracting to me. It does serve the purpose of forcing my attention to the in focus reflection, and being that the assignment was reflection, that's not necessarily a bad choice. But for some reason, the composition, having those out of focus tines where they are, I find they have a lot of weight. My attention is drawn to them. And it might be because this in focus portion is going almost to the edge. So somehow that's minimizing the focus on the reflection. Again, we have the contours of the reflective surface distorting the reflection and causing additional reflections, highlights, shadows, which I find detracts somewhat from the actual reflection of the tines. So I like the simpler composition. I like the less busy composition of this versus the other one. But for me, it still would be better with on a flat reflective surface, so that we eliminate these distractions, and a looser composition, putting this at a stronger point so we're not right at the edge where it runs off, so that, and that would also make the tines a smaller portion of the composition where they'd have less weight. I think that would work better. So this image I would give a C plus to B minus. I think a different reflective surface and a little different composition, and it would be a B image. All right. Here we have an image by Hayward. No EXIF on this image, so I can't really comment on any of that. Bit of noise in the sky up here. Blues are always a little noisier than everything else, but this looks a bit like processing to me. The noise that blue generates is usually color noise, little bits of magenta, red, green and stuff in it. So that looks like maybe processing. Aesthetically, this image, the composition for me is off. With one of those rules is don't put a horizon line right through the middle. And we've done that. And what that has done is put equal emphasis on the upper half and the lower half. So I don't know which part I'm supposed to be looking at. And by default, I'm going to want to look at a subject and not a subject's reflection. So I'm looking automatically, my attention goes to this area. It's an area of brightness. It's an area where I would expect to see a subject, an actual subject, and not a reflection. And that's not where you want my attention to be. So a different composition would help. And I think since it's a reflection composition, I would, for this, bring it down to here. Now, when you have a really good reflection, and that's what you want to emphasize, often I will include only the reflection. In my composition. And then in this image, include something to give it context. Maybe a floating leaf. We have a little bit of stuff down here in this corner, but it's not distinct enough. So a leaf or a duck feather floating, or even a nice ripples where you just take a pebble and throw it in there. So it takes your reflection and tells the viewer that it's a reflection. There's enough here that I can tell. There's a few ripples up here and some little bit of stuff here, but I actually don't want those. Had this image been taken with a really good sky, maybe tree colors and stuff like that, and then a point of reference. I think that's what I would have looked to do in that situation. So overall, With this image, as it is, it comes across as a snapshot. I think with a different horizon line, bringing down from the sky, it improves it, puts the focus on the reflection more, while keeping the scenery, or even, as I said, focusing only on the reflection would have both been better. Now, I have the rule of thirds up here on this overlay, and I did just arbitrarily put the horizon line on the upper third, and I did complain that the original horizon line is exactly at the middle, and that's all following the recommended rules. Place your horizon line, upper third, lower third, don't put it at the middle, etc., etc. But I didn't put it at the upper third because of the rule. I just felt it worked better towards the upper third. My only point there is, I'm talking a lot about that compositional rule about the horizon line, but don't follow it explicitly. Compose the image the way you want. I just think this didn't suit this image. So for me, this image is a bit of a snapshot. It's a C. I think there's a B to B plus potential had you focus just on the reflection and then use something to give it a context. A ripple, a feather, a leaf floating on the water, something like that. And I think there would be a B plus, even an A image in that idea. All right. Are we done? We are done for this month. So I hope everything I've had to say has been of some help and it's taken as intended. So this month's video critique is done, and I will see you again next month.